Please welcome the man they call the Lung, Mr. Ned Overend. There you go.
Howdy. Thanks.
You get your own chair there, bud.
That's nice.
So Nedley, take us back. Growing up, you not your typical childhood. You grew up all over the place.
Yeah, my dad worked for the State Department. So I was born in Taiwan, and we lived in Tehran and Ethiopia. And in between, we'd come back to Bethesda, Maryland, where the State Department was in D.C. So
Sports growing up?
Not so much. My dad played tennis, and my dad actually, speaking of that, he passed from a heart attack at the age of 55.
Guy.
Yeah. So he was high stress. Didn't smoke. Wasn't particularly overweight.
Yeah.
But high stress. I don't know. I brought that up, but
thanks for sharing that.
It's good to be here though at 59.
Exactly. That's true.
When my old man died at 55, I thought, he had gray hair. I was a 15-year-old or something. I thought, geez, he died of old age,
55 years old.
Gray hair is 55. That's old, A little different perspective now.
But running was the first sport, though?
Yeah, I ran in junior high school and junior college.
Now, when did you? I remember hearing a story. You were a good runner, but then you had a camp up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you realized that maybe you had a different skill set.
I was a pretty strong runner. We won the NCS NorCal High School meet, and but on the track, I wasn't particularly fast. But we had in college, we did a 6-school meet in Yosemite Valley. So we did like a 10K on the valley floor, and I was probably 6th in that race. And then the next day we did a 10-mile run up Glacier Point, which was 10 miles all uphill, a couple thousand feet of elevation gain. And I won that, and I can remember thinking, this isn't that hard.
Going uphill wasn't that hard.
No, it was compared to suffering in the flats and with leg speed. So that's when the first time I had an inkling that I could be a good climber.
So when did you come to San Diego?
I'm going to say 1978.
And what were you doing?
I went to San Diego State for a year, and then I was a mechanic at San Diego Suzuki.
Yeah, because a lot of people think that, okay, Ned Overend becomes world mountain bike champion. He sort of grew up riding a mountain bike. Mountain bikes hadn't been invented at that point, correct?
No, not really. They kind of started in the 80s or early 80s, and then they really started taking off in the mid 80s, in the racing and stuff like that. But you and I were involved in the very early days of triathlon here.
Yeah.
In Chuck's.
Yeah, in the late 70s, they had these events called Chuck's Triathlon out of Fiesta Island and different things like that. And but I remember you were working at San Diego Suzuki, and Ned was working on these amphibious vehicles called the Scrambler.
Yeah, we're also a distributor. It's a 6-wheel drive amphibious vehicle, so you could drive it right into the water. And duck hunters like to use them, in flooded cornfields or something. They could get where nobody else could, to...
So when those things broke down, this is the guy they'd call out there in the middle of the cornfield, go fix that guy's Scrambler while he's trying to figure out how to kill a duck.
I was a little bit of everything. I was the sales manager, I was the mechanic, and I was the guy who cleaned the bathroom in the office. So I think I was the only employee. But we would sell one, I would deliver it, and if the thing broke down, the thing with the 6-wheel drive amphibious vehicle is there's not too many things that can go out there and get it once it breaks down, because
you're pretty hosed.
Yeah.
So we met rock climbing down in Mexico and actually put on a little rock climbing class for kids. And at that time, again, we were doing a little running, living down on Mission Beach. And I remember doing a running race, and I was like, okay, let's go back to the apartment. And he's like, well, I got to stay. I won. I'm like, what? I'm like, I had no idea the guy was really, I knew he was fit, but I didn't know he was really an athlete. And so he won the race. And then next thing you know, in 1979, we read this article in Sports Illustrated on the Ironman. And what do you remember about, and 15 people had done the race. and 12 people had finished in 1978 and 1979. Nobody knew what this thing was all about. So Ned and I tracked down the guy who won the race, a guy named Tom Warren, who owned a tavern here called Tug's Tavern. What do you remember about beating that guy?
Yeah, well, and then we did the Tug's Pier Swim.
Yeah.
I remember the biathlon. But as I remember, it was your idea. I had never been to Hawaii, you know, and Bob said, let's do this race. You know, let's do the Ironman. And I had done some body surfing, and I had a bike I was riding, and I had a background in running. So I figured I've never been to Hawaii. Let's try it. But the weak part was the swim, and that was most intimidating. Bob and I were roommates in a condo in Mission Valley, and
120 lengths in a mile pool. That's what we were training in for
you
the
got about
Ironman.
4 strokes, and then you had to. You couldn't really do a flip turn because the pool was too shallow.
So we go over to the Ironman, and this is when it was over on Oahu before it moved to the Big Island. And there had been big storms on the island, and we're standing at the host hotel where they're having the pre-race meeting, a hotel called the Grand Otani, and the waves are breaking against the building, like 10 feet high.
Yeah, they had a big hurricane. I mean, I remember in Maui, like all of the telephone poles were blown down.
Yeah.
But they normally, that course was the Waikiki rough water swim, you know, which was a full-on open water swim. And at the pre-race meeting, we were out there looking out at the rough water swim, and it's nothing but, you know, foam and wave after wave as far as you could see.
Where we'll be dying the next morning.
I mean, and we had, you know, we'd invested so much in the trip, of course we'd have to go out there and kill ourselves.
Right.
But so they changed the swim course, you know, and of course all these big hardy swimmers like, what, you know, are you kidding me? You can't do that, you know, and Bob and I were pretending to be disappointed.
They were going, oh, I can't believe you're changing. What a wussy event. I can't believe they're moving it. But meanwhile, we were like,
so they
thank God we'll live.
They had to swim in a protected lagoon, which saved us.
It saved our butts. So anyways, back then there was no aid stations. You had your own support crew. Who was your support crew?
It was my girlfriend at the time, who surprisingly became my wife after that weekend.
You have to be a pretty aggressive person to follow somebody in a car, somebody who's on a bike in a car around Waikiki and around Oahu, because there's a lot of traffic. You have to be a little bit of aggressive driver. Pam is not the most aggressive person on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
When did she catch you in the bike?
I got out of the water, and I think you go through Honolulu somewhere, and that's immediately where I lost her. And probably about 65, 70 miles into the bike, she finally caught up with me, and she found me. I had been stopping, you know, and drinking from garden hoses and filling my water bottle, and and then, when she saw me, she pulled off to the side of the road, and one of the cyclists ran into the back of her car. So,
Oh, I didn't even
so
know
she
that.
did help me move me up one place. Anyway, even though I didn't have any support for a while.
So you end up finishing that race and finishing 24th. That's what's so cool is when people ask, Ned, you did Ironman, how'd you do? Well, now you all think about that there's 2,000, 3,000 people. There's 108 of us over there on Oahu. So Ned finished 24th out of 108, but hey, I finished 55th. So I always tell people I finished 55th at the Ironman World Championship. Who the hell knows, right?
Yeah. I mean, my strong suit, I was running at the time, but by the time I got through with that swim and that bike, I was no longer a runner, right? I was a wogger.
So you come back from that and still working at San Diego Suzuki and still fixing scramblers. Then you did Ironman again the next year, but then you moved to Colorado.
Yeah.
But even before you moved to Colorado, you were still trying to find your way in terms of jobs. And I remember one time he decided he was going to become a blackjack dealer in Vegas.
That's right. So I had a 65 Datsun pickup that it burned a lot of oil, but I've been reading up, about card schools and stuff like that. And they, the employment sounded pretty good. Blackjack dealers, or card dealers made good money. So, and I had played some poker in Vegas and stuff like that. So I drove out there intending to go to school, looked for a place to live, realized that my car wouldn't function in that heat. And I didn't have enough money to get a place and go to card school. So I came back to
my place.
San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah. He basically, within 24 hours after he had packed up his whole truck and left,
right.
he was back going,
Not
maybe
only that-
I should try to sell Amway.
The temperature on the sign downtown Las Vegas was 117 degrees, too. That was part of it.
Yeah. And the Amway thing didn't work out that well either.
Wasn't meant to be.
So then you moved to Durango.
Yeah, I met my wife, girlfriend at the time, and we decided, I took in Stanley Andrews Sporting Goods. I don't know if some of you remember that. They're not
Yeah.
around anymore. I think
Yeah.
there was a flyer for an ice climbing class in Ouray, Colorado. And I saw that, and I'd done a little bit of rock climbing. Bob and I had done some rock climbing in Mexico and stuff. And so I bought some ice climbing equipment, and I drove to that week-long class by the International Alpine School, and it was climbing waterfall ice, which was pretty cool. And that area of Colorado was so beautiful, I decided, I convinced my girlfriend to move to Durango in the San Juan parts of southwest Colorado. So we moved there, and not intending to really do any more triathlon or be a professional athlete or anything of that nature. I was got a job at a car dealership as a mechanic.
You're working as a mechanic, but then you fall into not ultra running, but trail running.
For one, and I did well. I won.
Set course records, Kendall Mountain.
Yeah, Kendall Mountain.
Imogene Pass.
Imogene Pass, right. I'm glad you remember all that.
Second twice at Pikes Peak.
Second twice at Pikes Peak Marathon. The first year, a guy named Chris Rivalry beat me. This tall, white guy, big guy.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I can beat that guy. So I trained up. I improved my time the next year. And like a 95-pound Navajo Indian named Al Waukee just blew the record out of the water. And he was literally couldn't have been more than 95 pounds.
Yeah.
That guy was a hill runner. And
He
he went on to win Pikes Peak like 5 times. But I was second again that year.
Then, and I was getting little newspaper reports. You're setting records at Kendall Mountain Run, but we're not talking much prize money in off-road running.
No, not even at
Pikes Peak had
and
nothing.
I hadn't considered, I was working as a car mechanic, and still it was just a hobby. And then I started doing some mountain triathlons. Estes Park.
Estes Park Triathlon started with a 27-mile trail run. It was more than a marathon. 27-mile trail run, and I used to run with this radio thing around my neck called bone phones. And so I was in the race listening to the report of him winning the marathon, people were just running the marathon. He's winning the marathon before getting on the bike for the 75-mile bike ride. And you're up at, what altitude was that up at? Estes Park's pretty high.
As high as 10,000 feet at the top of the bike course.
So imagine this. Imagine you did a 27-mile mountain marathon, and then you've rode 75 miles, and the swim is 2 miles in a pool after that. You think it's a little bit of a crampathon? Yes, it is. Everybody's like just holding their quads the whole time.
When you have the swim at the end, it's good to have it in the pool. Otherwise, people would be drowning.
Yes, they would. So you win that, and when did you first hear about mountain biking, and when did you get in there? Because you had some motocross background, and you were good climbing. You figured that would be good for you.
Before that, I injured myself running, as all runners do. And so I turned to just road bike riding, and I started road racing.
That's right.
And
made
I was
the U.S. team.
fairly accomplished at road racing, and rode the 83 Coors Classic with the Raleigh team, with Andy Hampston and Thurlow Rogers. Were both on that team. Steve Tilford was on that team too. Some real classic road racers. And then I was deciding, okay, do I want to try and be a professional triathlete or a professional road racer? And right around then, mountain bike racing started developing. And I had, at San Diego Suzuki, I'd race some off-road motocross and stuff like that. And I was a mechanic, which was important in the early days of mountain biking to be able to set your bike up and keep it together during the race. So that was perfect timing for me. I really didn't want to, if you're going to be a road racer, you aspire to go to Europe and do the Tour de France. But already at that time, it was rumored and kind of known that there was a drug issue in the peloton in Europe at professional road racing. So I was thinking actually about being a triathlete, but mountain biking was actually the perfect sport for me, with a background in motocross, with the fitness of road racing, and and some mechanical ability.
And ability to process oxygen, because mountain bike
perfect
races
timing.
are up at altitude.
Yeah, and I lived at altitude, and most of them were ski area mountain bike races. Big Bear, Mammoth, Winter Park, Vail. So it was.
Meant for you. Well, I remember they had this thing called the Levi's Cup, I think it was called, that in L.A., and that's when the Stetina brothers and all these guys were considered the best guys, and you came out, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you won there, and that was sort of the beginning where people started talking about you.
Yeah, they I don't know if it was the Levi's Cup or the Gant Series, but they had a series of races kind of like in the inner city.
Yeah.
And stuff. And there was a bunch, like Andy Hampson did a bunch of mountain bike racing, Dale Stetina, he's a mountain bike racer. There was a bunch of the road guys crossed over, and a bunch of the cyclocross guys as well.
What was your first paycheck?
Well, an actual paycheck, I was working at a Schwinn dealership. I had quit the mechanic job to try and focus on a job in bike racing. And so I was working at a Schwinn dealership, and we called Schwinn up, and they said they'd start paying me, $10,000 salary and a certain amount of bonus, and it kind of went from there. And that was probably 1983 or 4.
When did you feel that you could make a living at this? That this was going to be your
Well, it
professional?
wasn't so much then. Then I was still working quite a bit, even during the summer, and then in the off season, I was working a variety of jobs. But probably 1986.
Yeah.
I started making maybe $35,000 salary, and then you could add $10,000 bonus and stuff like that to it, and they were covering your expenses as well. And it was continuing to grow. The sport was just blowing up. It was ESPN. We had like 6 races on for the national series. ESPN covered every one of them. They did a show on every one. They did a show on the World Championships. And in 1990, the UCI officially recognized mountain bike racing. So that was the World Championships I won, which was in 1990 in Colorado. And that was
that changed
international.
everything.
That's Sports Illustrated and Outside Magazine, and so it got coverage everywhere. So yeah, and it was.
So a funny story. He wins the World Championships in 1990 on this black Specialized, and that bike ended up. You gave me that bike, right? The one with the little deal on it. Anyway, so that bike.
We won't tell them anything different.
Oh, it wasn't the real one? Oh, my God. Anyways, in 2010, we were invited with a group from Challenge Athletes Foundation to ride mountain bikes with President Bush down in Texas. And, I called Ned, I'm all excited to go ride mountain bikes with President Bush. He goes, well, what bike you riding? I said, well, that bike you gave me a couple years ago. He goes, a couple of years? That was 1990. That was 20 years ago. You can't ride that same bike. So then it was a 29er. And talk a little bit about the change in the technology in mountain bikes and how much that has made mountain biking accessible for average folks like me.
Well, it's so big. It's always kind of been accessible, but the performance of the bikes is, the first, I actually did have a fork. The first year that RockShox made a fork was 1990, and they were just prototype forks then, but I did race on one. It had, maybe 3 centimeters of travel, and it was heavy and it was super flexible, but you could tell it made a difference. And coming from a motorcycle background, I was a believer in full suspension. But so it was friction shifting, wasn't index shifting. We were using toe clips and straps. And you fast forward to these days, of course, it's carbon, it's full suspension, front and rear. We have built-in inertia valves in Specialized bikes. I work for Specialized in product development and sports marketing. And your inertia valves built in, so on smooth ground, your suspension is firm. When you hit a bump, there's a brass weight inside the valve, inside the shock. It drops down. The shock becomes active when it's rough, and then as soon as it's smooth again, the shock becomes firm. So super efficient, super lightweight. Of course, there's a price tag that comes with it. But God, what else they have? Nowadays, the wheel size is a real challenge, especially for the dealers. We raced on 26-inch wheels. Then in cross-country, pretty much everything switched over to 29-inch wheels. If you picture a bigger wheel coming up against a bump, it will roll over the bump using less energy. Instead of being resisting to it, it rolls over it more easily. So 29-inch wheels became, the go-to wheel size for cross-country. Trail bikes were drifting towards 29, and then now they've come back towards 650B. So now there's 3 mountain bike wheel sizes. And then the tire width is all over the map right now. One thing that I'm part of development in, it specializes the fat bike development. And,
Do you guys know what the fat bike is with the big old tires on it?
You've probably seen some around. They're really dramatic looking. I mean, the tires are up to 5 inches wide. But in the upper Midwest and in the Rockies and Canada and Alaska, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for racing these bikes on snow tracks. And they generally, you can't take them in super deep snow, maybe 5 or 6 inches. But on packed Nordic tracks, there's a ton of racing. And on any weekend up in the Midwest, you might see 400 or 500 fat bikes at a given event. And they have a restriction. The tires can't be any narrower than 3.8, but up to 5 inches. And it's pretty amazing. It's a lot of fun. Those things, they look heavy and slow when people see them around here. But you get that thing out on the snow, they're much faster than they look.
And I think you guys are looking at the world, aren't you the world champion? National champion.
National champion.
National champion of fat bike.
Yeah, that was on the Birkebeiner ski course in Wisconsin last March. And the national championships, which is sanctioned by USA Cycling, will be in Ogden, Utah in about 3 weeks here this year.
So mountain biking was one of the, really, triathlon started in '74 and became an Olympic sport in 2000. Mountain biking started later, really, in terms of organized racing, and became an Olympic sport in 1996. Was that after you'd won the Worlds in 1990 and you had a great career going? The Olympics, I'm assuming, was a big goal for you, even though it came in a little later in your career.
It was. I think I was 40.
Yeah.
In '96, and but I'd still. I'd been doing well. I was third qualifying for the Olympics. Third on a 2-man team. So. That's close, but no cigar.
Yeah.
And it was good. And I actually had an opportunity to be on that team, but one of the qualifying races I flatted, and I don't know. I mean, there are excuses, right? You can't have that stuff happen to you in mountain biking. But so I didn't quite make the team. But mountain biking had changed a little bit after '94. There was quite a bit of drugs in the sport, similar to road cycling, but it had affected mountain biking, and there was a marked difference. In '94, I won 2 World Cups. John Tomac won 1 World Cup. Tinker Juarez won a World Cup. After '94, there wasn't an American in the top 5 for the next 10 years. And it changed so quickly that it was very hard to even place in the top 10. And it was the advent of EPO. And I'm not blaming it all on EPO. Americans still aren't competitive really on the international mountain bike scene, and I think it's more because we don't race at the same level, and we don't embrace the World Cups like the rest of Europe does. I think drugs-wise, I think it's greatly cleaned up. But at the time, you were really only trying to get on the Olympic team. You weren't trying to get a medal,
right?
Because we just weren't.
You weren't going to be competitive. When you look at that era, like you said, with a John Tomac and a Missy Giove, and you look at the names and Greg Haribaldi, all the big names, those are names we still think about. I mean, really, mountain bike, a lot of other sports, triathlon, one of the big moments for us was being in the Olympics in 2000. It spurred a lot of growth in the sport. With mountain biking getting in '96, it almost seemed like the sport went a little backwards in terms of the pro level.
Well, what happened, and I think, I was fortunate to be involved in those kind of glory days where people who are doing well in the sport, I mean, not only were we on ESPN and, Wild World of Sports, but the magazines used the athletes almost exclusively to
sell
advertise
their
their product.
Yes.
So you'd have a tire, you'd have a helmet, your shoes, the frame, and everything like that. So we became really famous and well known. You fast forward into the mid '90s, you have downhill, you have dual slalom, you have 24-hour racing, you have marathon racing. So there became all these different athletes, and it was international. So some of the best were from all over. So it kind of got diluted. And as mountain biking grew, they didn't just use the athletes to advertise the product. You know, they'd use different, you know, I mean,
Right.
you'd have touring bikes. I mean, there became so many different models of mountain bikes that, so, you know, I was fortunate to be involved in a time when it was intensively based on advertising specific athletes.
So then you move on to, you retire from mountain biking, right? And then move on to XTERRA, which had been, you know, you were in those first couple XTERRA World
Yeah,
Championships.
96 was the first XTERRA on Maui.
Yeah, and you had what, Mike Pigg, Jimmy Riccatello, Ned Overend, first, second, third, couple years in a row.
Yeah, I was third in the first one, and then I was second in the second one, and I think the three of us swapped places maybe
Yeah.
there, and then I won the
The next two.
98 and 99.
Won the next two. So he made the transition. And talk a little bit about, you're a guy who's always been fit, has never really, you know, you don't take a ton of time off, but you also have never been a guy who's overtrained, right? Talk a little bit about how you've adapted to age with training and racing.
Well, I still enjoy racing. I still race road, mountain, fat bikes, cyclocross. Not too much. I race specific events here and there, but I still love to train and race, and I've managed to stay, you know, healthy and durable. One of the reasons is I don't do too much volume. You know, I don't burn myself out. I'm very careful not to get injured, and you know, I prefer to train with a higher intensity, and it's my preferred method of training.
So talk a little bit about what you would, when you're getting ready for what you're racing, what type of mileage do you do? Or do you even keep track of that? You say, I just go an hour.
I keep track of hours.
Okay.
But, you know, and I train from 8 to 12 hours a week on the bike. I have, you know, the fat, I'll take for instance, this race, it's going to be a 2-hour fat bike race in Ogden, and I'll work back a couple months from it. You know, I'll have a certain amount of fitness going into it, because, I mean, I never really stopped training. But, you know, and then I'll figure out what kind of course it's going to be, and I'll train specifically for, you know, whatever kind of hills, whether it's going to be more power to weight as far as steeper climbs, or whether it's going to be more of a power course.
Right.
And, you know, for instance, I've been riding in Oceanside here, and I'll do a 2.5-hour ride out East Lilac or West Lilac Avenue. There's some great climbs there. There's one climb, it's like 15 minutes, and I'll go out on the ride. You know, it's an hour and 15 minutes into the ride, and I'll turn around, and there's a Strava segment on it, and do a specific interval on that. And, you know, it's essentially lactate threshold training and pacing yourself. You know it's going to be about a 15-minute climb, and you pace yourself to figure out what your steady state can be for the fastest time on this climb. You know, and you do it several times, and you figure out, okay, here's where I'm going to have to go hard. Here's where I've got to soft pedal a little bit. I got to know, you know, that the end of it's going to be this steep. So essentially what you're teaching yourself to do is to race at lactate threshold. I'm a perceived effort trainer. I don't use a watt meter or heart rate monitor.
None of that stuff.
And but I'm very good at determining, you know, what level I'm pushing myself at, and what kind of volume is too much for me, and how much intensity I can stand. I love intensity, so I don't need a heart rate monitor or a watt meter to push myself, and it's worked out for me.
You think?
Unstructured nature of it is one thing that has helped me last this long.
Yeah.
You know, I train the way I want to train, and so I don't get burned out on it. And structure, staring at a heart rate monitor, staring at a watt meter is, to me, it's stressful. It's mental stress. I love to do, you know, group rides, like the Swami's ride last Saturday. And, you know, there's a lunch ride that's specialized whenever I'm out there, and they're high-intensity efforts. And then on my own training, I'll go and do, you know, specific threshold stuff that is more specific.
When you, like, in 2012, you won cyclocross, Masters Cyclocross World Championships. Do you train differently when you're going to something like cyclocross rather than mountain biking or fence?
Cyclocross, it doesn't really lend itself to my ability. Cyclocross it's literally like a constant 3 to 5 second efforts out of every turn. You have to slow down for all these turns and all these technical sections, and then power back up. So it's very power centric. I mean, it tends to be fitness and bike handling, which lends itself to me. And I generally start out slow and then catch guys later on. But I mean, I love doing it.
Yeah.
It's a cool sport, but you have to train specifically for it. And you know, you do some power running, like stair running and stuff like that, because the running sections are short and intense.
Do you do much running? Much swimming?
Very little swimming. Still don't know how to swim. But yeah, no, I run in the off season. I love to trail run, and you know, I run on snowpack trails and stuff like that.
So it's funny, I was looking at this article. There's an online article. It's called "The Old Man of the Mountains." It was written about you in November of 1991, when you were 36. It was 24 years ago, and you were the old man of the mountains back then. The rivalry between you, the old man, and John Tomac, the kid came up through BMX, that really was something, like you said, televised. The older guy, the younger guy, that became sort of the Mark Allen, Dave Scott story for mountain biking. What, when he first came in, what did you see in him in terms of his talent?
Well, phenomenal bike handler. You know, he was a multi-time national BMX champ. You know, had been riding BMX the whole time. And he was the fastest guy. He forced everybody to raise their level of bike handling skills, you know, or you weren't going to be competitive. So, you know, I could climb, and I could out-climb him at the time. And we would have some classic duels where we'd be on the climb, and then you'd want to be the first person into the single track, you know, because then that would force him to pass me. So we would have battles for the single track, you know, because I could hold him up a little bit if I could get to the single track before him on the descent. But, no, he forced, like I say, everybody had to go downhill faster when John Tomac came on the scene, because he was phenomenal. And then he got to be a better and better climber. He won the World Championships in 1991 in Il Choco, Italy. I was third at that one, and Thomas Frischneck was second. But yeah, he got to be a world-class climber as well as a descender.
What's interesting is in our sports, triathlon is sort of the same way. People have to adapt. Dave Scott was known as a great swimmer and a great cyclist, and he sort of had a hold on the bike, on the run, and he became the best runner. And for yourself, early mountain bike, you had you had a circuit race, right, with long circuit. Then you had a hill climb, right? And so really there was an advantage for you by having that hill climb, because that was your strength. Hill climb goes away, and then they make shorter loops with not quite as much climbing. How did you adapt to the changes?
Well, you had to be more of a power racer.
Yeah.
You know, and road training really helps with that. You know, it tends to be a lot more powerful. Criterium training, circuit training, you know, or circuit racing on the road bike helped a lot. I've always done about half my training on the road for mountain biking. That's definitely an advantage to be able to, you know, to ride and you know, there's a lot more surging. It's a lot punchier if it's a flatter race, and there's going to be more drafting. So having some road experience helps with that.
What's
in the drafting? You know, and it's interesting. You fast forward to the XTERRA days.
Yeah.
And I could compete at XTERRA early on before I was, you know, my swimming certainly improved and my running, but I could compete because it was a long hill climb, and it was a technical course, you know. So it forced guys like Pig and Riccatello and the new guys that came into it, Conrad Stoltz, you know, to be better mountain bike riders. They had to be climbers, and they had to be bike handlers if they were going to compete at XTERRA.
Best race ever. Best day you had on a bike in a race.
Well, you know, you win the World Championships, you get to wear colors, and they talk about it forever, but and you get to claim it. So that was an important day. First world champion, first official UCI world champ. So that's important, but there was so much pressure on me to win that race, I didn't really enjoy it. I was just relieved when it was over.
Because it was in Durango, right? It was in your hometown.
It was in Durango. It was, you know, the sponsors were there. I was listed as the favorite, but all these teams coming from, you know, Europe and across the world, you don't really know who you're racing against. So there's no guarantee for sure.
Yeah.
You got to make it happen on that day. So that one was the biggest relief. But there's been some really fun races. You know, winning XTERRA.
Yes.
Because I had, you know, a little bit of a fish out of water, and I decided to embrace that sport late in life, and I loved it. You know, the promoters and the whole experience. And actually being able to win a couple of those world championships was...
How old were you when you were winning those? I'm 41, 42?
Yeah, I guess so. Early
Wow.
40s.
Nice. What's next?
I was a young man
You're in
then.
the- yeah. What's next?
Well, fat bike racing is coming up. I'll be 60 this summer, and
Will you really?
I want to do
I
some
thought I was a
racing.
lot older than you.
I'm in my 50s now. So. But no, it'll be fun to get out and do some events. You know, whether Mount Tam hill climb,
Yeah.
you know, Mount Washington maybe, different hill climbs, maybe Mount Evans and stuff like that. You know, to be able to put up a time when you're 60, it's
It's
motivating.
always good. You did Leadville. That's a 100-miler. That's, I'm sure you were thinking, oh my God, this is a long way to go. What was that like?
Well, the owner of the company, Mike Sinyard, was a big Leadville fan, so he was just pressuring me to get out there and do it. And normally, I mean, it's a, you know, 7-8 hour mountain bike ride, and I don't train that. I'm not an ultra distance guy like that. So I did some longer rides. It was Levi.
Leipheimer?
Levi Leipheimer was doing it. Todd Wells was my teammate, and he was, you know, he had already won it once, so he was favored. But of course, Levi was going to be tough to beat. There was a bunch of big names there. 2 hours into it, Levi swerves to avoid a pothole and you know, or a hole in the dirt, crashes into Todd Wells. And I was still with the lead group. We had 5 of us at the time were left, and Todd crashed and ruined his front wheel. So you know, I was, you know, support teammate essentially. So I gave him my front wheel and took Todd's, and because he had a flat and he had busted some spokes and stuff like that. And Todd, you know, he, you know, we swapped wheels and he regained the group, and he didn't actually win. Levi ended up winning. I think Todd was second. But
And you rode on a tacoed wheel?
I rode on that wheel probably for about 45 minutes because they have some tech zones.
Okay.
So I had to change the flat, you know, bent the wheel back into shape. It was rubbing the side of my fork every revolution. But so I made it and finished that race. So you know, I can scratch that off the bucket list.
You don't ever have to go back there and ride 100 miles ever again.
No, it really doesn't suit my style of training.
How about a big round of applause for Mr. Ned Overend? Any questions from you guys? Have any questions?